Brian, the portfolio holder at Dorset Council.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, Councillor Matt Palmer, joint member for planning, regeneration and infrastructure with Chris Wilmore on South Gloss Council.
Thank you. Quite a few of you moved around there. Have I overlooked any councillors? I think one or two may have dropped off the call. Let's progress. Right, Councillor Bryan.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Councillor Ray Bryan from Dorset Council. I'm a cabinet member with the portfolio of highways, travel, environment, harbours and climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bryan. I hope I've not missed anybody. Shout if I have. Don't think so. Okay. So my name's Alan Creedy. I'm a head of service here at Wiltshire Council and a member of the STB programme team. I'm in the chair briefly to deal with a couple of matters to do with future governance and then election of chair and vice chair. So by way of brief introduction, we need to deal with the matter of chairmanship for the board. Previous chair and vice chair's tenure has expired, so we have to elect a chair and vice chair at this meeting. But there's an opportunity there as well, and that is it comes from the Department for Transport's instigation. It comes from some advice they gave us a while back on how we might like to consider how STBs are set up, and some of that advice was in respect of certain posts being recruited, other more technical stuff, but there was a specific matter about election of new chairs and vice chairs at a point where those tenures expire, which is clearly for us right now. So what the department have asked us to do is to explore the potential benefit of moving to independent business chairs after current chairs' terms have expired, bringing STBs in line with arrangements elsewhere in the world of STBs, Transport for the North, Midlands Connect, and also some other pan-regional partnerships as well. And that, as I say, is something that they've invited us to consider when the opportunity presents itself, i.e. when current tenure of chairs expires, and here we are with that opportunity. So before we get to a point of electing a new chair, I'd like to canvass views of the board in terms of two options, really. One of which is to carry on as we are, really, to appoint a new political chair and vice chair in accordance with the current constitution, and really sort of decline consideration of a move towards an independent chair until the election cycle comes around again, or to take the opportunity and realise some of the benefits that department suggests will accrue by appointing a political chair and vice chair on an interim basis now, but work towards appointing an independent chair. That would require some amendments to the constitution, but they're fairly narrow amendments. They don't sort of ripple across the whole thing. So I'd just like to invite the board to give some views as to whether they want to go for one or other of those options. In other words, stay as we are or seize the opportunity for moving towards an independent or business chair. Sort of open it to discussion, really. Councillor Wilmore.
I'm reluctant to intervene on this as a new member, but having looked back at the history and having looked at some of the other equivalent regional bodies, I think it is right to suggest that we do move towards an independent chair, not moving with undue haste, but working towards an interim chair once we have our ducks lined up, to use a phrase, at a point when we think the organisation is ready to do so, so that we move at the point at which we will get the best possible independent chair, which may not be tomorrow, but it may not be 5 years' time. Let's just move at the pace that feels right as we continue to develop this process of moving towards an interim chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilmore. Any other views? Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think we do need to consider the approach from the department seriously, and to look into creating an independent chair if we can find the appropriate candidates. And we need to take the time to try and make sure that it's someone who will take us forward. Thank you. Thank
you. Any other views that others want to express? I think that's very helpful. Well, very helpful in the interim. Councillor Young.
Yeah, just to say I'm in agreement too from North Somerset perspective. I think it's really important that we use this group to move forward as quickly as possible. So I would actually be quite keen on us working towards appointing an independent chair earlier rather than later, and potentially enabling them to work in partnership with potentially a political vice chair. So I would fully support that direction of travel.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, and I'm following suit in that I support the move towards an independent chair at a let's call it a moderate pace. There's various things that need to be sorted out, which you are aware of, including the constitution and matters such as payment and voting rights and so forth. And I think the idea of having a political deputy chair would work very well.
Thank you. And Councillor Alexander.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with all of that. There are matters to be clarified. We do want this organisation to be politically led, but we also need to make sure that it is actually led by a personal group of people who've got the energy and time to really drive it forward and give it a national voice. So I hope that we can have both of those things in the arrangement in the future that we agree on in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Bryan.
Yes, I'm in agreement with us looking at going towards an independent chair, but I'll need to know a lot more details first before I'd be able to make a decision. So I'm happy to go with an interim chairman and see which way that takes us.
Thank you. Or any other views? I don't see any. That's very helpful. If we minute that as wide support for moving towards an independent chair, then that takes us towards the next and most important item on the agenda, which is the election of a chair. Had we been heading in a different direction, we may well have been looking to appoint a chair and vice chair for the full tenure. I think in the circumstances, even though the appointment may be interim, I think we probably need to do some work to explain what some of the implications of that move might be, a little better idea of timescale and cost. I see, I'll just pause there for a moment. Councillor Rigby, I'm in danger of overlooking you.
Because I'm in danger of not being able to change the colour of my hand to something more visible. I was jumping the gun slightly, I'm afraid, in that I thought that we'd sort of made a decision on that bit in this meeting now, and we're looking for nominations for someone to actually chair this particular meeting, just to get us through to the end of the meeting. If we're not at that stage yet, apologies, forgive me. If we are at that stage, I would like to nominate Councillor Alexander.
Well, I think we're both on the same page, Councillor Rigby. I was sort of putting the two together, really, in that having opted for one, then it makes more sense to have the chair appointed on an interim basis, and just to get us through this meeting. I think we're agreed that probably for this meeting alone, we're looking for chair and vice chair for that, and then we'll take a view when we start to bring some papers back next time for how we chair going forward, still on an interim basis. So yeah, I think you're right. So it's down to that selection process. Councillor Hadley, you have your hand up.
I'm happy to second that nomination for this meeting for Councillor Alexander.
Very good. So Councillor Alexander has been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Anybody dissent? So Councillor Alexander is appointed as chair. We're looking for nominations for vice chair to see us through this meeting. Do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I am happy to propose Councillor Palmer from South Gloucestershire.
Thank you. All those in favour? I see nothing other than hands up. So Councillor Palmer's appointed as vice chair. I saw Councillor Young, I saw your hand up briefly and it went down again. Did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, it's just voting, sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you. So Councillor Alexander, my work is done. Can I hand the meeting over to you, please?
Thank you very much, Alan. Good afternoon again to everybody. Our first item is public forum, as we call it in Bristol. Do we have public participation? Any questions or statements, please?
Chairman, I think you've missed item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes.
Oh, the minutes indeed. You're correct. Thank you very much. Minutes and actions. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes before I go through the actions, please? We all happy to approve?
Yep.
Anyone wish to propose that and a seconder for the approval of the minutes, please? Was anyone here at the last meeting?
I'm happy to propose, Councillor Alexander.
Thank you. And I think, who else?
I'm happy to second if you want a seconder.
Oh, David, you're back. Welcome.
I am.
David, you were here at the last meeting, so you're entitled to second them.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We have a proposer and a seconder, so those minutes are now approved. Moving to the actions at the end, which are highlighted on the minutes in red. Alan or James, we have, as I can see it, additional version to be sent referring to issues and options paper.
Yes, if I can answer that, Chair. Yes, that was circulated around the final version, and following a few minor last-minute tweaks, it then went out to engagement, and I'll be giving a bit of an update on that under item 7.
Thank you. That is the only thing I can see highlighted, unless anyone wishes to correct me. We're all happy that we have dealt with actions from the previous meeting. I should take your silence as being consent. Excellent, thank you. So we are back again then to public participation. Do we have any public forum statements or questions, please? Alan, James, sorry.
Yeah, we've had 3 questions submitted by David Redgewell. These have been put on the website and circulated with the papers to members. We've answered 2 of the questions, but the third question, we're currently pulling together all the information. The third question was about the railway stations across the Western Gateway area and whether access for all improvements were being undertaken. So we're just in the process of bringing together updates for all of our stations, and we will then share that with the board and with Mr. Redgewell.
Thanks very much. And Dave, get well soon, because I know you're not particularly well at the moment. Wishing you all the best. And so we move now to our item 5 on the agenda, which is National Highways consultation. And I believe it's over to Alice. And I think I've seen you there somewhere, Alice.
Hi, yes, I am here, but it's actually Richard Leonard who is presenting today.
Lovely. And we thank all our partners for coming along to this meeting. We do get very, very good contributions and support from our partners such as National Highway. So thank you in advance, in case I'm so excited by the end of it that I forget to thank you. So over to Richard, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Councillor Alexandra, and hi, dear colleagues at Western Gateway. We've got a bit of a presentation which we'll share and run through. It's a bit of a double act between myself and Simon Chapman, who's from the Department for Transport. So I will share my screen and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you.
Just technology permitting. Just confirm you can see my screen, please.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Delighted to be here to talk about RIS3 publications and our consultation going forward over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Lots to tell you about. We'll take you through the slides and pull out the salient points and leave some time for discussion. But clearly, the publication of our RIS3 documents, that's the initial report, the Connecting the Country and route strategies, is a key element in terms of framing the future roads investment for 2025 onwards. So Simon is going to do a few of the introductory slides. Simon, I will drive if you want to kick off, and then I'll take over from you at the appropriate point. Is Simon there? Is Simon there? Have I lost everyone?
You can see him on the list, Richard.
Okay. I tell you what I'll do, because I wasn't sure if there was a bug there. I will kick off then.
No, it's all right, Richard. I'm back again now. I tried to be clever and use my video, and oh, there it is. It's working now. So hello everyone. And yeah, can I echo Richard? Thank you for inviting us to talk today. What I wanted to do was just give you a little bit of an overview of where we are in the RIS setting process as much as anything. But I'm also conscious that whilst for Richard and I, setting road investment strategies is in our blood, and we live and breathe it. For many of you, it's something that comes around every 5 years, and it's forgivable if you're a bit rusty on the process. So first couple of slides are really just talking you through the process, and then a little bit about sort of the objectives that we've set national highways. So in terms of what a RIS is, well, it contains 4 elements. It's a vision. It's which looks ahead to 2050 and sets RIS3, which covers 2025 to 2030 within the context of that. So very much a stepping stone for sort of longer term goals and aspirations. It's a performance specification, so what government is buying for its money in terms of network performance and performance by national highways. It's an investment plan covering not just enhancements, but renewals and maintenance and sort of wider capital and resource spending. And it's also, as I say, a statement of funds available, and that's ultimately what the RIS is. It's a funding statement rather than a sort of a transport plan, if that makes sense. So the components of the RIS will start to take shape when the draft RIS is published later in 2023, and but the final RIS isn't expected to be published until 2024. So that's when all of the moving parts are finally settled. I think it's fair to say that the way that the RIS has come together this time has evolved from what we did in RIS 2. When we set RIS 2, we started with a SOFA, a sort of a quantum of funding, and then National Highways built an investment plan and a performance specification around it. This time round, we're moving more to starting with a level of performance that we're buying in terms of network reliability in terms of safety and other components, outcomes. And then we're developing an investment plan and agreeing a SOFA with Treasury to reflect that. So it sounds a bit of a technocratic point, but it is really forcing Richard and I and colleagues to think sort of far more about the customer and network priorities first, rather than starting with the funding. So next slide, Richard. So risk setting process requires some pretty careful choreography between National Highways, ourselves as the department, and ORR to ensure proposals and advice and decisions flow through into a final whiz in a logical way. And the idea is that each component of the process builds on the previous work. We've just finished the research phase of setting the RIS, and as Richard said right at the beginning, National Highways has published its SRN initial report, which is the company's assessment of the condition of the network and its performance and future priorities in terms of investment. And then the government is then consulting on that initial report to inform the development of the draft RIS. Once we've published the draft RIS, that then gives National Highways the platform on which to then build its detailed plans for the next RIS in its draft strategic business plan. Next slide, Richard. And then final slide is on sort of what the asks are of the RIS. So we as a department published a document called Planning Ahead in December 2021, and that was really the first public statement on RIS 3, and it proposed 6 strategic objectives representing broadly a continuation of the work that began in RIS 1 and RIS 2. And these strategic objectives were reviewed by the STBs, including Western Gateway, and approved by ministers, as I say, about 18 months ago, 2 years ago now. Just to flag, whilst we've identified 6 strategic objectives for RIS 3, I think government and ministerial priorities have evolved since then, and I think the overarching area in ministers' mind is growing the economy, creating better paid jobs, and generating opportunity right across the country. So one of the Prime Minister's 5 key priority aims. And the role of the SRN in connecting towns and cities and international gateways isn't lost on ministers as realising this goal in part. And growing the economy is likely to be the principal lens through which ministers are considering RIS 3 decisions. Other areas like safety are clearly a very high priority, but growing the economy is certainly first and foremost at the front of ministers' minds at the moment. So on that, I'll hand back to Richard.
Thanks, Simon. So what I'm going to do in the remainder of the slide is take you through the core documents. So there's the initial report, which is the sort of headline document, then 2 reports, the route strategies and the Connecting the Country, and they've got slightly different timelines for consultation. I do want to, at this point, just say that the work to get to this stage has involved real collaboration, and I do want to thank the members, the Western Gateway Board and the officers on the call for their support, their contribution, the evidence that you've developed in taking us to this point. It is about taking it in a holistic way, and it is about partnership and collaboration. I do want to say thank you first and foremost, and hopefully the documents do reflect many of the issues that you've raised in engagement with you over the last 12-18 months. So the first key document, and probably the most important document, is the initial report 2025 to 30. And that's a report which the consultation has been led on by the Department for Transport. The report sets out a few things. Firstly, it looks at the current state of the network. It looks at what those maintenance and enhancement priorities are for the network. It thinks about future development needs and prospects, and it also identifies investment for the next roads period, so 2025 to 30, but taking a long-term view as well, thinking about route strategies, thinking about the connecting the country and the 2050 vision, and taking a broader view. But it's the key document at this stage that we're consulting on, and the others are slightly behind, which we'll talk about the consultation timelines later on. The initial report, route strategies, are a condition of our license, and we have also engaged with various other parties in terms of the development of the initial report. In terms of this slide just sets out the role and importance of the SRN. I think having conversations both at the board and with partners, it's recognised that we do need a well-functioning, efficient SRN to deliver both the priorities of growth and housing, but also connecting communities, making sure we address impacts on communities in terms of noise, making sure we extend opportunities for employment, enjoyment, and so forth. So, the role of the SRN is critical to the transport system. Actually, it's critical to the transport system. It's critical supporting the aspirations across Western Gateway, whether they be multimodal transport, whether they be improving active travel, or connecting better to ports, or connecting better through geographies such as the connection between M4 and Dorset. So really important network, and a network which we've got some views on, and look forward to your views on how we can improve it ultimately. In terms of the initial proposals, I'll talk through these in a little bit more detail, but we responded to DfT's 2021 consultation, where they set the strategic objectives in terms of our themes. So our themes build on what we've done previously: safety, making the most of our network, how we think about customers and community services, decarbonisation, environmental sustainability, absolutely critical, and taking a target approach to enhancing our network. So 5 key themes, and I will give you a whistle stop to the sort of key elements of each of them. So in terms of improving safety for all, we continue to strive towards a zero harm network, and it's based on the safe systems, which many of you will have adopted in your constituent authorities, which looks at the sort of key drivers about how you affect risk and how you reduce the risk of people being harmed on your network. So we do have targets around the number of people killed and seriously injured. We also have targets about number of casualties and number of collisions, and we also have a target around something called star rating. So in terms of star rating, we're strengthening our commitments and objectives around star rating and how we improve the star rating of roads. So a star rating looks at the inherent safety of the network and thinks about risk. And generally, those roads which are single carriageways have a lower star rating because the likelihood of a more serious collision is higher. So we're looking at how we can improve the star rating network, tackling those 1 and 2 star roads and aiming to improve them where possible to 50% over the RIS3 period to 3 stars. So how do we improve them? We're also looking at how we think about taking targeted measures around safety campaigns, suicide prevention, but all of this is about making sure our network's safer, but also resilient as well. So how we improve resilience of the network, how we reduce the number of incidents on the network, whether those be, people towing caravans and the seasonal issues on the M5 to, collisions on the network, which affect the A36 into Salisbury. So quite a broad brush approach. The next element is maintenance, renewals, and operations. How do we make the most of the network we've got? It's a key growing issue on the SRN. It's actually a key growing issue across all of our infrastructure, whether it be rails or canals or ports, about how we make sure we improve the asset and maintain the asset in a proactive way. The right-hand figure just shows you some of the requirements. And actually, there's been lots of sort of regulation and improvements in regulation through the environmental bill, which means that we need to do more around drainage, for example, water outflows. We need to do more biodiversity. So lots of work around the asset and a real focus on OMRs, we call it operations, maintenance, renewals. Third element is around customer and community. It's quite broad, actually. We are a customer-facing organisation. So how do we do more to make sure we support customers' journeys when there are issues? How do we provide customers with better information around their journeys? How do we make sure our network starts thinking about technology, autonomous vehicles, 5G connectivity? We do a lot of work around trials, for example. How do we make sure, though, as well, that we think about how we integrate better? I think that's something that we've been talking a lot around, is to how do we make sure we think about the SRN in terms of its integration with LRN, MRN, but also other networks and other modes. I think it's very important and a growing area of focus, and a growing recognition that some of the issues on the SRN are tackled by other partners in other ways, to make sure that we do provide good choice to people, and that they can make local trips through other modes. Driving decarbonisation for sustainability, you'll be aware this is something we're passionate about in terms of decarbonising our operations, maintenance, renewals, but also decarbonising and supporting the wider decarbonisation agenda being taken forward from government. So whether that be supporting EV charge out, whether that be trialling new materials, whether that be supporting autonomous vehicles, to make sure that we play an active part in this. We've also just launched our environmental sustainability strategy, which responds to the environmental bill, but also sets out targets around how we're going to improve our network in terms of environmental impacts. So I say biodiversity is a key one, but also climate adaptation and climate resilience. So a more proactive role on the environmental agenda as well. And there's the environmental sustainability. So that was published at the same time as the initial report. So you can have a look at that. It's sort of focused around nature, carbon, and communities. You will see a golden thread about some of the activities that we do. They are not independent; they are interrelated, as you'd expect. And the last slide is taking a target approach to enhancing our network. So we've put a proposition to government about having a more blended sort of approach to network enhancement. So we have a RIS 1 and 2 tail, which are important, and we'll continue to see those forward. But we're also looking at how we improve our smart motorway, taking on board the Transport Select Committee, and improve our motorway network, as well as how we take an approach to target investment on smaller schemes and route optimizations, improving the safety, looking at those 1 and 2 storage. So that overall is a sort of a really whistle stop to 5 minutes of what the sort of key themes of the initial report are, and just considerations, which I'm sure you'll respond to and reflect on, and whether you think we've got the balance right. The next document, Connecting the Country, is a master plan. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, or route strategies, just to give you an overview. I think it's important in terms of the RIS setting process that we reflect on. It's a process every 5 years, and that decisions we make in the next RIS have implications in 20, 30, 35, 40, 45, and 50. And actually, it's really interesting time to be a transport planner and a decision maker, because I think the factors which affect how we see transport and transport need are wider ranging than ever. We need more from our transport network than ever, and there are more demands on that transport network and more opportunities as well. So what we've done in our long-term strategies, we've had to think about what are the key drivers for change, what are the key vision that we want from our network, and to think about the sort of things we need to do to enable that vision to be delivered. So the overall approach for the SRN continues. So seamlessly integrated transport system, safety, reliability, economic prosperity, social value, and a thriving environment, which is that more proactive element around environmental sustainability. In terms of developing it, we've looked at quite a few focus areas and themes. So how customers will travel, how that will change, how they'll experience travel, and how we manage our network. I think what I would say to you is that the Connecting the Country provides a lot of evidence about how we think things will change in terms of travel demand, in terms of how people will respond to digital connectivity, decarbonisation. I know you've done lots of work around this as well in Western Gateway and within your constituent authorities, thinking about what those future trends are. It's worth a look just in terms of our thinking, in terms of the evidence base and how we think we need to take forward that sort of innovation in the next RIS, but also how we need to plan for the RIS after. And there's lots of good content in there, actually. We've also got something around road categorization. This is something which we're building on now. I think it's of interest to you in terms of your geography, in terms of thinking about levels of service and thinking about outcomes. So what sort of outcomes do we want from the network, and how will those be facilitated? So it is stylistic, the graphic. It doesn't have everything in it, but it's just trying to show you the difference between your bigger national corridors, your interregional routes and your regional connections. And I'm sure you've got some views on that map and how that shapes up, but it doesn't cover all the corridors. I think that's the key bit. And the last element of it is route strategies. So route strategies are a key requirement, a license commitment, and we produce route strategies every 5 years. We have done quite a lot of work building on feedback about how we think about our route strategies and how we develop the evidence base. They are pretty meaty documents. There's lots of research in there. There's lots of evidence in there. And thank you again for contributions to them. What they do set out, and there's some route strategies which cover your geography. What they do set out is 3 bits. They are built on engagement, they are built on data analysis, and then what we've produced for each of them is a route strategy initial review reports and story maps. And I think the key point is they're dynamic. So these will be developed over the course of the next 12 months based on the consultation we got. They're not fixed. As will Connect the Country, that will evolve as well. So those 2 documents talking right now will evolve and will improve. And it's an interactive platform as well, the story maps, and they're really useful to see instead of reading a 200-page report, but they're good. In terms of Western Gateway, there's a geography and the key routes. So you've got a say 5, which showed you the front covers of, and those routes spread across the network. So common themes, safety, of course, how we improve safety, some key areas of where safety performance is a bit lower than we would expect for certain corridors. So the diagram on the left shows you star rating, which we talked about before. We've also got work around environmental enhancements and the work around severance of the network and carbon as well, in terms of around key urban areas and opportunities for short trips to be transferred off the SRN. And the common themes too, network performance. There are clusters of delay across the network. We do recognise that. Seasonality of traffic shouldn't surprise you in terms of some of the challenges, especially in the summer period. But actually also, especially on certain corridors, sort of it starts from Easter, doesn't it? And it doesn't end until sort of October, November. And then growing economies, about how we support growth, how we support the aspiration of partners in terms of different sectors as well. What the route strategies do is they have 3 key sections. They have a challenges and issues section based on the objectives. They then have route objectives. So what are the route objectives we think? But they also have something called areas for investigation. So what we do is we look at a corridor and we think, here are the route objectives and here are the things that we think we need to look at. They also identify where it's a RIS3 pipeline or it's a scheme underway. So they're quite useful in terms of shaping the sort of overall network. They're quite important in that they allow us to look at the corridors and think about what network need is. But I think what you've heard from the documents is you've got a strategic overview, a long-term view, and then you've got the route strategies which provide that sort of localized evidence base as well. Now the consultation, just so members are aware, there's 2 key milestones, and I know that Western Gateway colleagues are already sort of thinking about your response. So the first is that by July the 13th, there's an opportunity to respond to the initial report through the DFT's website, and there is a link there, and no doubt you've looked at it. There is a platform for all of these in terms of responses online, and I'm sure people who are watching it may want to respond online. There's also an opportunity, no doubt, to write in, and I would suggest that Western Gateway may write in with a more detailed response using some of the questions. But equally, we want response from a broad range of people, and I fully expect that colleagues across the geography may want to respond specifically in terms of their local highway authority network and what the requirements are or what the challenges are that we think the SRN needs to address. The second consultation is Connecting the Country in the Route Strategy Report. That's a little bit later. That's the 11th of August. And it's consultation again, same sort of process. The plan is then we take the consultation responses, we'll be analysing them, consider them. The initial report response will feed into DFT's things around RIS4 and the development of the RIS. The Connecting the Country route strategy will also do that, but they are also live documents. That's the key thing, that your inputs will shape the future 2050, but they'll also shape these route strategy reports, which are live. And that, and I'm sorry for taking so much time, provides you with a bit of an overview of quite a complex suite of documents, and hopefully it was useful just to provide that context. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Simon, for that presentation, which I don't know what to say. I found it more interesting than I thought it would be, but I did find it a lot more interesting, and I just felt there was sort of a breath of fresh air going through national highways, which just was quite encouraging, really. And I'll open up to questions. Anyone got any questions for Richard, Simon, or Alice? I have a hand up. Councillor Wilmore, I can see, and followed by Councillor Young, I think.
I think Councillor Young was first, if that's all
I
right.
apologise. Councillor Young, it's over to you.
Very kind. I agree. I think that was also really very helpful presentation, and obviously a massive amount of work that underpins it. I was really interested just to pick up. Great to see the ambition around decarbonisation and the real commitment to that and to environmental priorities. I think one of the challenges that we face as a local authority, and others will be in a similar position, I'm sure, is that while we're doing a lot of work on decarbonisation ourselves, we have very limited influence over users who are passing right the way through North Somerset on the strategic road network. And so I was just really interested to hear about how you see the user and the user journey reflected in your decarbonisation approach, and not just the infrastructure. I found it really heartening actually to see what you'd said around, I mean, obviously integrated transport is really part of the key to that, I think, but also in terms of your safety priority, there's obviously a lot of focus on the user and changing behaviour and those sorts of things. So I'm just interested to know whether that also features in the decarbonisation space.
Do you want me to start off, Richard, and then?
Yeah, of course, Simon, you go for it, and then I'll chip in, please, my friend.
So, so the department published its net zero transport decarbonisation plan last year, and you're absolutely right that the road user and decarbonising sort of road use is rightly at the centre of that plan, in that it's the road user where the biggest prize is to be had. I think that the point I wanted to make is that there is a line of sight between DFT's transport decarbonisation plan and the wider government commitment to net zero on one hand, but also there's a line of sight between National Highways initial report and its Road to Zero, which is National Highways decarbonisation plan, and the department's plan. So that there is a whilst NH doesn't have all the levers to deliver transport decarbonisation on its network, having that line of sight does mean that the department's levers can be utilised in National Highways sort of wider decarbonisation objectives, if that helps.
Thank you.
If I may as well, sorry, my videos came off. I think it's I think the power of the STBs as well, in terms of setting sort of both the regional and national direction around about thinking about trips between geographies. I think that's quite important. So it's really interesting. So when you were talking, Councillor Young, I was thinking about some work we're doing Transport East and EH about supporting rail improvements around Ely, which will take about 900,000 trucks off the A14. So I think there is real power in terms of the STBs about thinking about trips through geographies, because they are a big contributor to your carbon footprint within your geography, and we know that. I've had conversations with England's Economic Heartland on that. So I think there are opportunities between STBs who we talk to, and we're a part of a national team, but I think there are opportunities as well in terms of making sure that our plans are reinforcing. So how we work with rail, how we think about development, and always having one eye on carbon and what carbon means and how we think about carbon. I also think that some of the delays, it's about how you manage delay better and manage demand better, because you can take carbon by managing delay better and managing demand better to reduce the overall carbon impact. But yeah, I think it's a good point about that sort of broader ecosystem and how you deliver carbon, not as a binary, here's a road, but as a system. So I think it's a point well made.
Particularly mindful there of the seasonality point that you raised, because of course that has huge impact.
Yeah, indeed.
Councillor Wilmore.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, thank you. First of all, the story maps are absolutely superb. It's a really, really good way of interrogating things. And it's actually accessible to the public as well as people like us who perhaps have to spend our time reading more complicated documents. So thank you for that. I'm grateful for much of what's there as well as for much of what isn't there. You know, some of the things that don't feature in this are as important as what do. But a couple of questions really, and that's because I'm new to this regional body. I was really pleased to see the 6 objectives, but you explained the government is prioritising growing the economy. Yeah, for much of the routes, the strategic routes that cut through our region, the technology goal, particularly as you move southwards off of the M4-M5 corridor, the technology goal is a key constraint in growing the economy. If you believe that, as I do, that growth and net zero are not inconsistent. I'm not a great fan of the language around growth, but it's not that you have growth or that you decarbonise. It's making sure we do it in a decarbonising manner. And for much of this region, the lack of the technology goal, particularly on the non-motorway routes, is a critical constraint around growth in a environmentally sound manner. The other big question for me was the lack. I struggle to put the story together for this STB region. We end up having to put together 3 different narratives: the Peninsula Corridor and the Birmingham Corridor and the Wales Corridor. And I couldn't see in the documents online the place at which there's a rain check of the way those narratives interact. Given that our region, as you showed on one of your slides, has no north-south route through its region, through the STB, transport is around cutting across bits of our region in terms of your strategic network. How do we plug those bits together? Where do you in your strategy plug those bits together?
Yeah, would you like me? So the route strategy report, we did engage with Western Gateway about how we built them and recognising the routes, and the geographies are shown in terms of the route strategy report. We show each STB geography in terms of the routes and how they're built together. I think it's a fair point about, well, what is the interaction between all the routes within the geography? I think we've sort of reflected on natural geographies where journeys travel across STB geographies rather than within and the interaction within it. I think what I'll do is, if I can I take that back to the team and just have a conversation around the sort of the thinking at the outset about how that works? Would that be okay? I think you're frozen. Yeah.
It was a thumbs up, Richard.
It's a thumbs up,
Yes,
Brill.
thank you,
I think I sort of got the narrative, but I think I want to just check back at the ranch so I can explain it a bit better to you, if that's all right.
Thank you very much.
No, that's fine.
And the technology as a constraint to growth is the other.
That's and on that point, Councillor. I think there is a and you sort of started to pick this up. There is a sweet spot in potentially in what National Highways does on its network, where you have multiple strategic objectives achieved by at the same time, and technology is a classic where you're making the most of the network, and you are reducing carbon emissions by smoothing journeys and making and avoiding delay. So I think from a sort of a rationalisation point of view, for ministers, having that multiple, having them cited on that multiple win of investment is an important point. And yeah, certainly it's not lost on me. And we'll continue to make that. And yeah, point taken, particularly about A roads, in Western Gateway region, which where the technology is less well advanced than it is on the motorway network.
Do we have any other hands up? We've got 2 more minutes. In that case, I'll put in a word for our own M32 in Bristol, which you'll be aware of. And I know we've got folks from West of England Combined Authority on here as well. And there's a road that divided the city in the 1970s, and through collaboration with National Highways and the Combined Authority, there is so much to be gained from looking again at the status of that road in terms of local economies. Streets, Stapleton Road, if you know it, was cut down the middle, more active travel, better public realm, and new bus links going direct to some of the more deprived areas of our city as well, just from that effective collaboration between ourselves and National Highways. There's so much to be gained, and I hope that relationship can really blossom, actually, and we can all get the best out of it. Thank you. If there are no further questions, thank you to Alice and Richard and Simon for their presentation today. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Our next item on the agenda, then, we have updates from other associate members. So I think David Glynos is here from DFT, always gives us a very lively presentation. David, are you here?
I am. Can you hear me and can you see me?
I can hear you perfectly well, and we're looking forward to it. Thank you again. Thank you very much for joining us. And what's the latest from DFT for us?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I did, within the meeting papers pack, there was my normal update included within that. I won't go through it in massive detail because some of the information is probably quite historic, given that our last meeting was in February. But I will counter through it quickly. First of all, there was a number of announcements in the spring budget. That was back in March. I'll allow you the pleasure of going through the details of that. There's quite a few details, but you should all be completely familiar with the main announcements which were made then back in March. Strategic roads, well, we've heard all about strategic roads and the WIS consultation, so I won't go into that in any further detail. In regards to bus, and I know bus is very important for the Western Gateway local authority members. On the 23rd of May, you'll be aware of this, of course, but DFT announced a long-term approach to support and improve bus services. So essentially, it means that there is support in place now until April 2025. So that gives much needed and much requested certainty for the industry for almost a 2-year period now. As part of that announcement, also there was the announcement that the £2 bus fare pilot has also been extended. So that's been extended to the 31st of October, at which point the cap will then increase to £2.50, but will be extended till November 2024. So those are two fairly large announcements on bus. Moving on to active travel, so cycling and walking. Last month, 19th of May, the 4th round of the active travel fund, so that's the capital funding for active travel, was announced. So the announcement totaled £200 million to improve walking and cycling routes across England, and this included over £23 million of funding for schemes across the southwest. So this was actually funding from the 22-23 budget. Active Travel England has also has a capital budget of £50 million for this current financial year and an additional £50 million for next financial year. So details of how that will be allocated will be forthcoming in the months to come. There's also an announcement in regards to the Safer Roads Fund. So there was over £47 million of government investment to improve safety on 27 of the country's most dangerous stretches of roads across the country. And this included investment on the A35 in Bournemouth and the A3102 in Wiltshire. And finally, the question I always regularly keep getting asked is in regards to the local transport plan guidance and the quantifiable carbon reduction guidance. So this is a consultation which is being promised now on the revised guidance for local authorities. And I believe our initial intention, we were here this time last year saying it was imminent that the consultation on the guidance would be released. Well, we're in a pretty similar position, actually. It is imminent. It will be released very shortly. I have been reassured only this morning by the policy leads. So look out for that. They really are now gearing up to release this consultation following government right round to other government departments by the end of July. So that is a quick update from DFT, from Department of Transport. Again, this isn't not an exhaustive summary. Obviously, there's lots of other news comes out of DFT, as published on the DFT's website, but I've just tried to bring out the some of the highlights which would be of most relevance to the subnational transport body. Finally, before I pass it back to you, Chair, before I get asked the question in regards to confirmation of STB budgets for this financial year, advice remains with ministers, but again, we're working very hard to provide the confirmation that STBs require for their budget allocations for this financial year. Of course, you do have an indicative allocation. Your business plan was predicated on that indicative allocation, but you haven't yet received the confirmation from DFT because we're waiting on ministers to opine on it. Nothing to worry about, I don't think. It's just the ministers have got a huge inbox and they're working through it now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Thank you, David. You've got 1 or 2 minutes only, I'm afraid, according to our agenda, and I see Councillor Thomas has her hand up.
Thank you very much. Can I just double check on this DFT guidance timelines, because our most recent information was after the summer recess? Are you saying it will be before then, as best as you are aware?
Yeah, well, there's certainly policy leads which I met only this morning in London, where I'm sat now, are certainly hoping to release the consultation, prior to summer recess. That's what they're working to do. Again, unfortunately, I was probably saying the same thing this time last year. So don't hold me to that, but that's certainly what they are aiming and planning to do. Of course, that is consultation on the guidance. It's not confirmation of the final guidance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's quite tough on those of us who are doing our local plans, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, David, I don't want to seem to criticise or anything, but these are really important and challenging documents on their own. Without anyway, I won't labour that point. Councillor Young.
Yeah, just a quick one. You confirmed on STB budgets the expectation of confirming funding for the A38 scheme, the MRN. Is that the same timescale, or do you have any update on when that's due to be announced?
I have no. The A38 MRN scheme. The Manadon Junction one, you mean?
Yeah.
It's currently being still considered by ministers, alongside a whole suite of other MON and large local major projects. The initial delay was very much emanated out of the spending review last autumn, whereby following that the DFT undertook an efficiency review, where very hard decisions had to be made on budgets going forward. which culminated then in the spring budget. Yeah, ministers are currently getting through the backlog of decisions to be made following, sort of the greater certainty we've got on DFT budgets moving forward and budget availability moving forward. So yeah, I've seen it. I know that ministers are looking at it now. So hopefully it won't be it won't be in too much longer before you hear a response from DFT. Obviously, it's a very large scheme. It's an extremely large local major scheme. So of course, the larger it is, the more problematic perhaps it is to make the decision sometimes. But no, they're looking at it now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Final question, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Hi, David.
Hi there, Andy.
Hello. Just back to the local transport plan. Obviously, we are trying to do our local transport plans right now, and I thought what we were waiting for was actually the guidance coming out, not the consultation on the guidance. So, do you have a timeline for when you anticipate finishing the consultation if we're not actually started that and getting to the guidance?
Yeah. So the plan, as I understand it, as of this morning, was on the so long as we get wide confirmation to release it, is to have the consultation over until September, and then to quickly work on the consultation response in around that time to confirm then the guidance very shortly afterwards. But in the meantime, what the guidance, what the advice will be from DFT will be to work on the consultation version of the guidance as soon as it's released.
Thank you.
David, thank you for your ongoing support for the STB, yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm afraid we must hurry on to Matt Haywood, who is here from Network Rail. Matt, I can't see you on my screen, but I think here.
I am here. Yeah, can you hear me?
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thanks, Councillor.
And thank you very much for coming along. And yes, we're running a little behind time, but we look forward to your report.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to be as brief as I can then. And like David, I hope that you've had a chance to see, or you will have a chance to see this update in paper form. I'm very happy to take away any specifics. So I suppose I'll probably start in reverse with the kind of conclusion, if you like, for the Western Gateway, which is that we in Network Rail are continuing on a sort of successful joint programme, really arising from the rail strategy, the Western Gateway Rail Strategy, and our strategic studies that we partnered on and scoped together, and that's allowed us a really good platform to undertake some joint development work. And I think that continues to be a really good model for how we can move from objectives set and defined by and for Western Gateway towards investment schemes in heavy rail that deliver those outcomes. So that's working well. Some of the studies that you will hopefully be familiar with that have appeared on our website recently. We've got the Dorset study, the West of England line study, some Bristol area work as well. All of that is giving rise to some of that development work, and the jointly funded development work that we're undertaking at the moment includes specific improvements on what's called the Heart of Wessex line. That's between Bristol and Weymouth, and obviously a very important north-south corridor for the Western Gateway, and indeed on the West of England line between Yeovil and Salisbury. So that's work that we're working on together to hopefully identify a compelling case for investment that delivers against those objectives that are put down in the rail strategy that Western Gateway established 2 years ago. There's a little bit in my note around the wider position in the industry. I think the key thing, of course, is that absolutely the revenue position is very different to what would have been assumed had COVID never occurred. But that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom. Recovery is strong around the network, and particularly for what's known as leisure travel, which is effectively non-commuting travel, and that is in fact the sector, if you like, that travel in the Western Gateway would skew more to. So if you compare it to London and the southeast, for example, which is very much a commuting dependent sector. So actually, the recovery is strong and in favour of the role of the railway in the Western Gateway, I think. So we shouldn't lose sight of that and the opportunity to continue having some success finding investment to improve the network in the Western Gateway area. The last comment I'll make is in the next, hopefully the next few weeks, we will hear what the fate of the schemes that have been bid to the Restoring Your Railway programme, which is a very popular and prominent programme. There's a number of schemes for which we're awaiting a decision in the Western Gateway, including we've got Wareham, Swanage, Corsham, Devizes, and a few others. So we're expecting to know what the next steps for those are in the next few weeks, and that will then help us further prioritise the next stages of our joint development plan. So as I say, hopefully there's plenty in the update, and I'm always willing to discuss any of the elements of that, but hopefully that suffices for the time we've got today.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions? Great. Well, I'm sure we all look forward to more investment in the Heart of Wessex line. You know, there's the challenges of road links there, and the reluctance of, I think, many people on this call to see too much more road building in some of our most attractive areas of the country mean that we welcome a more an ambitious rail solution north-south there. And it's a beautiful line, but it's not a quick one at the moment. It's a lovely way to spend an afternoon, but it'd be great to get there a little more quickly, perhaps. I don't see any hands at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. We all okay? In which case, Matt, thank you very, very much again for your support today and the ongoing support of Network Rail for our board. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's over to James now. James?
Yep. Thank you, Chair.
James, so up to you for some of our own productions
yes.
here, rather than other people's work. We're going to showcase our own work, which is indeed outstanding and also available on the website.
Right. Yep. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction, for the glowing introduction. We've got 3 updates to bring you this afternoon. Chris, if you could just load up some slides to go along with this. The 3 updates are around the coach strategy work. And then we've got Matt Smith from Atkins, who's going to be talking us through the revised version of the alternative fuels for freight strategy. And then Ola is going to give us an update on where we are with our carbon baseline and forecasting tool. So if I kick off first with the coach strategy, next slide, please, Krisha. The coach strategy originally came out of a commitment for the STB to undertake a bus and coach strategy. But with the arrival of the bus service improvement plan requirement, we refocused that to look more on the role of coaches. And I think it's probably fair to say that coaches don't take a particularly prominent part in our local transport plans or in our local plans. And yet coaches have a lot of potential, particularly providing better connectivity and serving areas which aren't so well served by the rail network, and also the need to improve facilities. So we came up with 5 key objectives. Or I should say that ACOM have been our consultants who've done all the evidence gathering and the work on this. And the 5 objectives are around improving that urban and rural connectivity, including the possibility of new routes and better integration. The need to encourage new technologies, particularly around alternative fuels. The need to develop easier and better access to information and buying tickets and accessing coach services to make them more attractive. Improving facilities, particularly important, improving the stops, the interchanges, drop-off and parking facilities, better facilities for drivers. All in all, just making it more attractive to go by coach, more attractive places to wait, rest, and to interchange. And then also to work very closely with the industry to increase the engagement with the industry and to encourage a more coordinated and transparent decision-making process. So those were the objectives. Next slide, please, Krisha. We identified 6 key strategic themes and spinning out of that 36 interventions grouped under them. The key themes: connectivity, decarbonisation, information and passenger experience, infrastructure and facilities, fleet operation efficiency, and strategic policy and coordination. And with those 36 actions, I'm not going to go through all 36. They are listed in the covering report, and then there's the main coach strategy document to go and have a look at as well. Those interventions, I should stress, they're not all by any means for the STB to take forward. It's very much about working in partnership with our local authorities, with the coach industry, and also with wider partners such as National Highways and indeed Network Rail as well. But coming out of those 36 interventions, the strategy recommends focusing on certain key areas. And if you bring up the next slide, please, Krisha. Those key areas are based around the need for better data collection. It came out very clearly during all this work, but there isn't a lot of information on coaches and the impact of coach services. So more work needed on gathering data and research. The potential to have a passenger awareness campaign for coach users. As one of the findings of the work is that there isn't a great awareness of the coach routes that are out there. What more can we do to help to promote those? A suggestion to set up a new Southwest Coach Sector Steering Group. This would follow on from the format we've actually been very successfully using for our Southwest Freight Forum. That's a joint one with the Peninsula, where we bring together the freight industry. This will be a very similar one, bringing together the coach industry, but again, with very much with our local authorities and with other key stakeholders on board as well. And then the fourth element to going forward for 23-24 is to look at in more detail at the potential for 3 new coach routes. So these are set out in Appendix 1 of the report, and I'll just flash them up on the screen very briefly. Can I have the next slide, please, Krisha? This is one of the routes, very much about, all 3 routes are very much about addressing north-south connectivity and serving corridors which aren't necessarily all that well served by rail links, but wherever there's possibility to link into existing rail hubs. So this one is Bournemouth Poole to Christchurch and on to Bath and Bristol, 68-mile long corridor. Next slide, please, Krisha. This is another north-south route, but more, well, I suppose more northeast to southwest, Cheltenham, Gloucester, down to Bristol. Again, linking in with other interchange points, but also serving areas which are either off the main coach network or are not well served by the rail network. And then the third potential new route is another north-south one. Next slide, please, Krisha. This only shows the top northern part from Cheltenham down to Bournemouth. A lot of work to be done on exploring the potential for these, but the strategy, having looked at potential demand, looking at current travel patterns, looking at regional transport movements, concluded that actually there is potentially a case here to explore these new north-south strategic coach routes. There are 2 3 recommendations. Next slide, please, Krisha. Coming out of the report, yeah, three recommendations to the board to approve the coach strategy, to approve the programme of interventions, which is set out in section 4.2 of the report, and to delegate to the programme team and the senior officers group to take forward the programme of interventions for 2023-24. I'll pause there, Chair, to take any questions.
Thanks, James. Could you remove the screen share? Thank you. I think it's a groundbreaking bit of work, really. You know, I think coach travel is got a poor image, but actually, I think if anyone's travelled recently on some of the companies, it's actually a very pleasant way to travel. Councillor Wilmore, you have your hand. No? Yes, you do. Councillor Wilmore, then Councillor Hadley.
Whoever got children in the background, could they
mute?
Have
a bit of background noise. If somebody could mute themselves, please.
Sorry, it's probably.
There we are. Culprit
thank you very much.
Councillor Wilmore and Councillor Hadley.
It's a nice piece of work, but I think there's a huge. I'm struggling with the discontinuity between this and the previous item, in relation to the National Strategic Route Strategy, because the glaring omission in that one was the Bristol to Bournemouth corridor. And here we're saying this is so important, we really need to be pulling it out as a potential major coach route with all the implications that has. And if it's important enough to be a major coach route, then isn't it important enough for some of the transport work that, for example, was being contemplated on the corridor to the east down to Southampton? I'm just puzzled by that we're flagging upwards the significance of this, but at the higher level it's not making the cut.
Yep. Chair, if I may come back on that. Yes, what I think what was not mentioned, and I see Alice has put her camera on, so she might want to pick up on this, that there is, as you probably know, the M4 to South Coast study. We're still awaiting the final publication of that. Chair, if you don't mind, can I pass to Alice to respond on?
Absolutely, you pass the controversial point to Alice.
Yes, sorry, Alice.
That's fine on this occasion. Yes, so we've got a strategic study which looks at the M4 to Dorset Coast lack of connection or poor connection at the moment. That study has not yet concluded in that we have not yet got ministerial sign-off of it, but the thinking has fed into the route strategies work. The reason there's not a Bristol to Bournemouth route strategy is that there is not currently a strategic route that does that job well. So the route strategies are defined on the existing network, the existing SRN route connections. But what there is in the route strategies that have been done that cover that area is that there's a strategic objective for that route that there would be better north-south connections. So there are the right hooks in the route strategies. It's worth bringing out in your response, I would suggest, to those. But the thinking is all there and it is all intertwined. I will try and reassure you on that.
Thank you.
And the possible solution's quite controversial given the countryside down there in terms of road network. So actually, I think the suggestion of a coach route there is a helpful way actually of possibly avoiding overly radical road solutions to that what's their problem challenge. Councillor Hadley.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome. The coach study, I think it's really good. I did write a whole list of points, and I thought I'd sent them in, but actually just looking at it, I may have just sent them internally. So I'll send those on, but just making a couple of points if I may. I mean, the problem of that road is that you get stuck behind a tractor. You're stuck behind a tractor, and if you're in a coach, you're going to be more stuck than if you're in a car. The overlap with buses, obviously with the enhanced bus quality partnership, understand that, but we do have some longer distance bus routes which sort of tie in with this, and not least there's one along the south coast goes from Bournemouth to Axminster that used to go to Exeter, and again, so we have a problem in getting east-west along the south coast. And similarly, if we have a southwest sector group for coaches, that doesn't include the A34 and the links between perhaps Bournemouth and Oxford. So that there's something about how we make sure it's not an exclusive thing, and that we do look slightly east as well. I think the other point I'll make now, but it's probably related to the next paper, is around coach operators. And I was surprised that the number of scheduled services was so low as a proportion of the total, it was only 2%. And obviously we do have a lot of holiday coaches, as I'm sure they do around Bath and other parts of our network. But thinking about charging strategies for coaches and whether that ought to feature in the HGV charging strategy, that it's not just about HGVs, but about our larger vehicles of all types. But that may affect where we plan to put some of our charging points to make sure that we're picking up coaches between service or in that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Helpful comments, I think. Anything else on that? James, would you like us to approve this at this meeting? You would, wouldn't you?
Yes, please, Chair.
The 3 points you made, could you just put those up on the screen again, please, that you wished us to do? You wished us to approve the strategy, approve for officers taking it. so that everyone's clear. 1, approve the coach strategy. 2nd, approve the programme of interventions as set out in section 4.2. And thirdly, delegate the programme team and senior officers group to take forward the programme of interventions. Can I ask elected members if they would like us to vote on those separately or together? Would you take it down, James, if you wouldn't mind, please, so I can just see folks. Thank you. Are you happy? First of all, let me a simple question. Are you happy if we vote on those together?
Yes.
Anyone? Any objections? No. In that case, can I propose that we approve those 3 decisions as one?
Oh, sorry, Don. Councillor Thomas had a hand up just a moment ago.
I apologise, Councillor Thomas. I even can't see you on the screen for some reason.
No, I'm here. That's okay. No, I was trying to use reactions with a thumbs up in terms of saying yes to the question, but I'm not sure that's a good idea anymore.
Well, thank you very much anyway. Would you like to second my proposal?
I'm very happy to second your proposal that we take them as a group of 3 for a single vote.
Thank you. Okay. So can we approve those 3? Hands up, please. Could you put a physical hand up, given that Councillor Thomas's hand doesn't work very well, virtual one. I can see 4 votes at least. I can't see other people. I can see Councillor Rigby. Councillor Palmer, is that okay with you?
We only have 1 vote from
Of course. Far be it from me to give 2 votes to South Gloucestershire. That's a very bad precedent. Okay, and then I think it's unanimous, unless anyone wishes to shout. Apologise for the screen. Yep, that is unanimous. Thank you, James. We take you on to alternative fuels now, which again, and there's another report available on our website.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. And actually, Councillor Hadley's last point about coach refueling is a good link into this item, which is the revised version of the alternative fuels for freight strategy, which came to the board back in December. There were various issues and suggestions made by the board. So we asked Senex and Atkins to go back and have another look at it, and they've now produced a final strategy which is available on the website, and the covering report is in amongst the papers. So I'm just going to pass over now to Matt Smith from Atkins, who's led this project to talk us through what's been happening. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today.
Afternoon, Matt. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Chris, are you sharing the slides, or shall I go ahead?
I can share.
Yeah, if you've got them there, that would be great. Lovely. Yes, if you go on to the next slide, we can skip this one in the interest of time. So those members who were present at the December meeting may remember my colleague Tally Diamond presenting to you on the alternative fuels for freight strategy that has been undertaken in partnership with Peninsula Transport by Atkins and Senex. And following that meeting, we have gone away and undertaken some additional analysis to integrate wider context into the study findings and to make more strategic recommendations, which, as has been mentioned, link quite well with the previous item of the coach strategy. In particular, we have considered the intersections between road freight and rail freight, ports and maritime infrastructure, agriculture and coach. We have examined the potential for other modes to act as hubs for alternative fuel refueling and recharging. We've identified additional potential high-level locations for HGV refueling. And finally, we've updated the core lorry parking locations using a more recent 2022 DFT data set that wasn't available at the time of the original study. If we go on to the next slide, I'll just run through some of the key findings as a recap for everyone. Yes, slide 4, please. Thank you. We undertook a literature and policy review as part of the study, and we found varying levels of clarity and ownership around alternative fuels for freight at the different policy levels. So at a national level, there are very clear targets, but the achievement of those targets is very much reliant upon local and regional authorities like Western Gateway, Peninsula Transport, and the local transport authorities. Regional policy is developing. There's the excellent Southwest Freight and Logistics Strategy, and ambitions are clear, and collaborative working has been established, which is a real strength. However, at a local level, there is more limited policy on freight and decarbonisation. However, the declaration of climate emergencies by many local authorities does demonstrate their intent. With an issue like this around future freight refuelling, it's really important to consider that particularly heavy goods vehicles travel across boundaries, and there's a need to consider these issues at scale, not just at local transport authority level, but at STB level and beyond. Go to the next slide, please. We undertook engagement as well with the freight sector, and as part of that engagement, we found that sustainability, safety and reliability were particularly important factors governing the uptake of these alternatively fueled freight vehicles by the sector. The cost of zero emission vehicles and their performance were challenges. However, as the technology develops, hopefully that will be overcome. There was a concern around the sector around investing in technology which may fall out of favour in the future. However, there has been over the last few years, borne out by research we have undertaken in these studies starting in 2018-19 with Midlands Connect, and our most recent work for Transport East, Transport for the South East and England's economic heartland, where we found that there's growing maturity within the road freight sector and coalescence around battery, EV and hydrogen as the most popular fuel types. There was a negative opinion of infrastructure within the region amongst stakeholders. There was concern around a lack of planned grid enhancements, a lack of planned infrastructure, and concerns around how that may restrict achievement of decarbonisation goals. And finally, there were just concerns around the clarity and certainty of ownership and how national policy will be delivered at a local level amongst some local authority colleagues. Go to the next slide, please. In terms of the comments that we specifically received at the last board presentation, we have addressed these by undertaking further stakeholder engagement and reviews of literature, looking at the potential to co-locate future freight refuelling with rail, ports, coach and agriculture. As part of this work, we found that there's a good potential for the co-location of road freight refuelling and recharging alongside rail, coach, ports and agriculture. However, it's important to consider that some organisations, particularly the ports and some rail freight interchanges, have built their business model around high vehicle throughput. And some organisations, there's a number of organisations which own and manage the ports in the UK and particularly the Southwest. Some of those organisations were more receptive to this idea than others. Others were concerned that it would be undermining of their business model, which is very reliant on a very swift throughput of vehicles. We identified that there is a strong potential for agricultural diversification, particularly in the most rural parts of the Southwest, where farmers may invest in electric vehicle charging for their own agricultural vehicles, and that could be utilised by freight vehicles making and collecting deliveries from agricultural businesses, or even charged out to passing vehicles using technology platforms and apps. And that's something that in particular should be taken forwards, but there is the concern just around fragmentation and a large number of small actors within that space taking on that role. Overall, though, it's important to recognise that particularly with agriculture, there are different decarbonisation challenges. With the coach sector in particular, there are more synergies, particularly in some coastal and again rural areas where there might be very low demand for the largest freight vehicles to undertake deliveries compared to some of the busier parts of the Southwest. However, the spatial footprint of a HGV and a coach is very similar. They both require similar facilities for driver, welfare and security of vehicles when they aren't in use. So there's therefore the potential to bolster the business case, kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, by delivering co-located coach and HGV refueling and recharging facilities. Move on to the next slide, please. I'll just pause on this slide for a moment and give people some time to review the revised network that we're suggesting. The revised network provides coverage across the vast majority of the southwest, looking away from the core strategic road network and even the major road network, to also consider coastal areas and other key destinations. It has been developed based upon the principle of each refueling site having a working coverage of 20 kilometres, that being based around the range of vehicles and the length of distance that people may be willing to deviate from their route if necessary to refuel. Although it is worth bearing in mind that in the future, public refueling demand may drop slightly due to the adoption of technology and more efficient routings and charging, therefore refueling cycles for vehicles. We used HGV flows from the National Transport Model to allocate the projected forecast demand for alternative freight refueling to the sites that we identified. We did this in a zonal way to enable the number of refueling facilities within each zone to be moved around within each zone without affecting the overall integrity of the modelling work, should it be necessary to change the locations of some of the sites. Where possible, we have recommended that existing lorry parking sites are repurposed or modified to also feature refueling infrastructure. However, when those sites were not present or there is no data available on those sites, we have also examined the potential for ports, future rail freight hubs, of which there are a number set out in the Southwest Freight Strategy as potential development sites, and where there is a strategic need but no suitable co-location facility, we have just made a recommendation that a site is developed in a particular area. Those are the pink triangle sites on the map, and those would identified based around the strategic need and located around the intersection of A roads mainly, as a way of ensuring they are as accessible as possible to the vast majority of vehicles. And if we could go to slide 9 next, please. The overall recommendations of the study are broadly similar to those from when we last presented to you. I'll just run through them very quickly, but we recommend that there's work with other public sector organisations and the freight and logistics industry to identify ownership, accountability and funding for the development of refueling sites to help unlock the decarbonisation of the freight sector. We recommend that stakeholders, we work with stakeholders to ensure the development of a cohesive refueling network which meets the changing needs of the freight and logistics sector. Work should be done with partner local authorities to ensure fluent and coherent freight infrastructure is developed to facilitate cross-boundary movements. The potential need for upgrades to electricity infrastructure at a grid point should be considered, and further engagement with rail, port, coach and agricultural stakeholders to realise those potential synergies identified by the study. And finally, it will be really important to undertake further business case development to help secure funding either from the public or private sectors for the delivery of the network. That is everything I've got to say. Happy to take any questions that the board may have on the study.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Hadley, first of all. Sorry if I've got you in the wrong order, but let's try Councillor Hadley first.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very colourful map, which actually makes it slightly difficult to draw the conclusions out of it. But it's very helpful to have thought in terms of the wider implications and distribution. And I wondered to the degree to which we're trying to fill in the same way with EVs as a public authorities. We're trying to fill in those areas which wouldn't necessarily be economic are the most obvious ones by default. And some distribution centres for individual companies, they're most likely to hook up when they're back at their own distribution centre, so fall off our demand effectively. So could you tell us a little bit about how you've managed that in the process in terms of thinking about the areas that will need public sector involvement or engagement or our support?
Definitely. Well, but yeah, there's a number of points there to pick up on. Firstly, the forecasting of projected demand has been based around DFT traffic statistics and Commission for Climate Change decarbonisation curves, which do account for some shifts in the freight and logistics sector, acknowledging that those are ongoing. In terms of the areas that are going to need the most support from the public sector, they are most likely to be the most rural parts where demand is lower, but there is a strategic need for, say, a vehicle travelling to the North Devon coast to refuel before it turns back to travel back. Otherwise, operations in those areas may become constrained because vehicles will have to stop off partway on their journey to refuel, or that they might become less attractive for certain operators to make deliveries to. So definitely it would be the most rural areas of the southwest where that support would be required. Along the key and most heavily trafficked corridors, particularly the M4, M5 in the West of England Combined Authority area, I would anticipate those sites would be the most commercially orientated and potentially delivered by commercial partners, but that would need to be considered as part of the business case development. It's not something that we were specifically asked to look at, but that is definitely my gut instinct there.
If I might just follow that on, Chair. Obviously, we're looking at things like solar, and it always comes back to the grid inadequacies. And I guess that's another overlay we need to think about in terms of where there's actually power on the grid and where there's not. That makes it expensive and therefore not economic for the private sector maybe to implement these things. Is that going to be our sort of next step in terms of when we get to prioritising the individual places? We're going to have to pick up those sorts of issues.
I'll defer to James on that one because I'm aware there's a separate stream of work being led by Midlands Connect on the prioritisation.
That there is, yes. The next stage on from this is to use a shortlisting tool, taking the very long list of potential sites that we now have, and evaluating those sites to get it down to a short list of ones to take forward. And yeah, the whole issue around the power supplies, the fuel source, is taken into account with that shortlisting tool. Midlands Connect are developing it with funding from the Department for Transport. We're expecting the next version very, very soon, and that's our next piece of work, is to start using that tool to identify which sites are going to be the best to take forward. And I will emphasize the point about the tool is that it can be used and it will be used to reflect the rural geography of the peninsula and the Western Gateway, but it's not just sort of an urban based model, because we're very conscious of the fact that there's likely to be that gap in the market where, as Matt said, commercial operators focus on M5, the big corridors, and it is very much those less commercial areas that I think we're going to be steering our shortlisting work towards. But that's still to be undertaken. That's the next stage.
And if I could just interject, having approved the tool, the methodology, do we think that DFT will likely stump up money for this interventions ultimately, or we're hopeful, are we?
I think it's we could ask David Glynas from the Department.
Well, I was avoiding doing that because he's probably getting on his emails somewhere. But I assume that is our hope, isn't it, long term?
I think it's going to be about trying to lever in as many different funding sources as possible, and yes, that we would hope would include the Department for Transport, but also the energy providers and other commercial operators. I think it is going to take a partnership approach to funding to help facilitate and deliver these locations.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm just focusing in, if you don't mind, on these additional, I like the idea of ideal network sites identified, which, if you've pointed out, tend to be in the rural areas where you might not get such commercial interest. And the logic therefore is that the local people certainly won't want them. And so I don't know so much about in the peninsula area, but the two sites I can spot that appear to be Wiltshire, Marlborough, for example. I mean, you know, people of Marlborough are trying to get HGVs off the route. The last thing they're going to be prepared to accept is a refueling, even if it's a hydrogen EV one. You know, if they had their way about it, they'd deprime the whole route. And so I'm just thinking. So I'm just thinking about, obviously any of these would need business cases developed and so on and so forth. And then the fact that this is an area of outstanding natural beauty, the fact that there is no land because it's a river valley and all. So, but what have you done so far in terms of assessing the sites, these ideal sites, in terms of potential viability, I suppose is my question.
Wasn't it, sorry to interject, but James, wasn't it the fact that was it rural councillors who actually asked last time for rural areas to be considered more, given that we'd focused too much on the existing corridors?
It was indeed, Chair, that the previous network map had some very large gaps, particularly in Dorset and parts of Wiltshire, North Devon and North Cornwall. So we asked Atkins and Senex to go back and come back with a different methodology to pick up on the fact that large chunks of our region were not going to be well served at all by the network. Matt, did you want to pick up more on that?
I was. Oh, sorry, Chair. Go on.
No, carry on, Matt. I'm just noticing a sort of a contradiction going on there, and where this is developed.
No, I don't think it is it's not a contradiction. It's if we need HGVs that travel all parts. You know, it's not a suggestion that therefore these rural areas shouldn't have HGVs going through them. Of course, you've got to have HGVs. You've got to service them, as well as, you know, sometimes you're on through it. But my question essentially comes down to, given in rural areas you are likely to receive opposition because of the nature of rural areas, I just wondered what the viability work to date had been done in relation to identifying the locations. There's a fair number of them down in the peninsula area that aren't named, so I've no idea where the actual proposal is. There's only one that's got a town name next to it, which happens to be Marlborough. So my question remains about what viability work has been done so far on these additional network sites in the rural areas.
So that work is going to be undertaken at the next stage. This stage of work was a forecasting stage to understand the future demand and uptake of alternative fuels, the number of, therefore the number of charge points of varying degrees of kilowatt power, and the number of hydrogen refueling sites required, and then where potentially they could be located. And I'd like to echo, James's point that I appreciate completely the point you make, Councillor Thomas, but I'm from a rural area myself, and I'm very familiar with the tensions that this sort of infrastructure development can bring. The request was to investigate the potential for further facilities in rural areas. The locations aren't particularly, with Marlborough, taking that as an example, as one of the sites that's represented by a pink triangle. That is very much an indicative location. It doesn't have to be specifically within Marlborough. We placed it there because of the strategic nature of the routes which travel through Marlborough, but that could be moved depending upon local considerations at future stages within the zoning that we've developed that represents that particular part of the network.
Okay, so the short answer is viability hasn't been done. They've simply been identified as the right sort of places in general, recognising the gaps that were identified first time around in the rural areas, and that's fine. That's the answer to the question. That
will be undertaken at a further stage as part of the Midlands Connect are leading on.
Thanks.
I think there's a general point, though, isn't there, that a facility like that would both serve the needs of the existing businesses, farmers, whatever, but also would need to attract other business as well as part of it. So there would be a tension there to that. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Don. Calling me Councillor Palmer, that's new.
I'll call you Matt next time. I'm being very formal.
I was just sort of thinking, and I might be, you know, way off here, but how are we managing existing businesses and the way that the fuels that they use? So, for example, I worked for UPS for 16 years. Okay, in London they've got electric vehicles. In Bristol they haven't, and they're not even worried about getting electric vehicles. And there's no drive within the business to change the vehicles. But so I know we're talking about, you know, gaps in the network, but I mean, these businesses, you know, like UPS, they're traveling from one location to another directly, and then they fuel up there and then they come back, and they're using diesel and things like that. Still, there's still not electric, you know, trunk vehicles, etc. How are we managing these businesses in making sure that they're looking towards you know, more sustainable ideas?
It's a great question, and I guess, you know, an analogy of kind of a chicken and egg is one of the kind of the initial point I'll take that from. It's a real challenge to encourage businesses and individuals to adopt electric or hydrogen vehicles if the infrastructure isn't there to refuel them and recharge them in destination, because that therefore limits the use of those vehicles to only routes and use cycles where they can travel from the depot and travel back under one fueling cycle. So it's really important to begin work developing a network like this and implementing a network as a way of breaking that cycle. One of the recommendations we do make is around further engagement with the sector, which is ongoing through the Southwest Freight Forum, to further understand the barriers to adopting electric and hydrogen fueled freight vehicles. And yeah, I can only recommend that further engagement is done, and I do quite a lot of work on decarbonisation of road transport, and that influencing and engagement is really key, particularly also to make sure that the speed of scale of the network rollout matches future uptake of those vehicles.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying. I think what I was trying to say is, like, say for example, you know, they get loaded up on an evening with all the packages on it, and it goes up to Tamworth, so that they know where they're going, they know where they're coming back from. They can probably get up there. You know, I don't know electric, but there's no electric points in Tamworth, and there'd be no electric points in Bristol. These businesses aren't moving towards sustainable ideas when they've got billions of pounds, when they should be looking at that kind of idea in other places around the country. I know, like, obviously in London, you know, they've done electric vehicles in London because they had to, so their arm was, you know, twisted, but Bristol, they don't have to, so they don't bother. And so I think we need a strategy, or you know, and I know they're working with University of Bristol, UE, and ourselves, South Gloss Council. I believe there's a kind of thing set up that they're all working together, but it doesn't seem to be driving these multi-million-pound companies to move towards that. And I say that, but you know, where in Bristol, you know, in Bristol and South Gloss, where I am, that there's a DPD site where they have got moved over to electric vehicles. But those electric vehicles aren't taking their electric from site. They're using ones that are at the roadside. So they're charging up by the, you know, by the science park, and they're using all these places to charge up. But what I'm trying to get at is like the companies that aren't bothering to do that when they've got billions of pounds to do it. And there should be almost a strategy in place so that we force them to move towards that. I know, obviously, like I said, in London they have no choice because if they just get fined. I'm done, obviously, in Bristol with the, you know, clean air charge, but it's not enough. It's Euro 6 or whatever. Diesel vans come under that, so they're able to travel into the city centre. But yeah, I was just kind of thinking, I know obviously you're talking about gaps within the network where people might need to, you know, to fuel up, etc. But with the companies that know where they're going from to, and they can get there in that without fueling up, these locations and sites should have the infrastructure that means that they could be going and using clean air and, you know, that kind of thing. And I was just wondering if there's any way we could move towards some kind of strategy to bring that into place.
Matt, that's a point well made, but it's a very wide discussion, and I've hideously overrun us. I'm looking at the agenda, and it's not a pretty sight.
Okay, sorry.
James is looking at me as well, but no, great point, and a good discussion we can have in the future. Can I ask Councillor Wilmore, Councillor? Is it just Councillor Wilmore that would like to make another?
Yeah,
point?
It's a quick one. I think we need to listen carefully to Max. His entire career so far has been in freight. I really have a question for around the mapping and evidence base in the report. And I'd be really great. I know the existing large freight employment areas have been picked up from LSOAs, I guess, via census data. Like most of us, I assessed a map like that by saying, does that map onto what I know about the areas I know? And I'd like to, Matt, can we have a conversation offline? Because I am staggered to see where in the Bristol and Northwards area have been identified as areas of high road freight employment, or rather the ones that haven't been. So there's something about a methodology question there that I just need to get my head round to understand the to find this credible. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a catch up, Chris, at some point pretty soon, because there's obviously stuff to go over. But yeah, sorry, Don.
No, and I'm happy to discuss the wider issues in Bristol, but having brought in the CAS, I can say there are challenges when you tell people what they can and can't do in their vehicles. And I think it's not just Bristol that needs to pick that up. There are wider areas that need to pick up some of that stuff as well. Can I ask that we have put this back to officers at a previous meeting for further amendments, and those have been made. Can I ask if we're ready to approve this, given that it has already been on a fair journey? I realise some of you weren't here for that journey, but is that okay? Can I ask that we vote to approve it, and do I have any seconder for that? Or can I put that to you that we vote to approve it? Matt seconding, thank you. Hannah, sorry. Yep, so we have a seconder. Does anyone object to us approving this report as it stands? Although the discussion I accept is one that's going to go on and should go on. We're all in favour of that. Thank you. Then the report is approved. Matt, want to thank you very much for this piece of work, which, as I say, is a never-ending one, and this subject is one of the most important that we face, and the discussion will come back to us. But thank you for taking us to this point on this.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And now I hand over to James and ask him to conclude the last two items in 5 minutes. Or maybe 10 minutes, I'm afraid.
Right, yeah,
actually, it's entirely my fault, James.
No, I think it's been a really good discussion that we've had on the coach strategy and on the alternative fuels for freight. Ola was going to give an update on the carbon baseline, but I suggest in interest of time that we probably move that to the next board meeting, if that's okay. And apologies to Ola for waiting around to do it, but. Just very briefly on that, we've rolled out our carbon forecasting tool to the local authorities, and we're getting very good feedback on how they're using it. But we'll come back and do that in more give it more detail.
Look, that's the main thing.
Yeah. So if I go on to very briefly the next couple of items, the strategic transport plan update. There's two aspects to this report. One is the issues and opportunities engagement, which took place between 19th of April and 19th of May. We've just put on the website a summary of the main findings. It was aimed at key stakeholders, so we weren't expecting to have an enormous response back. So I think it's very much more a case of the quality of responses versus the quantity. But we summarised those in the report, and in the covering report to this board meeting. There's a list of bullet points around some of the key things that came out. Generally, I think whilst there's some criticism in there, I think most of the comments are very constructive. There's agreement that we need to head for net zero, and that should be the top priority. There are concerns around it maybe taking a business as usual approach, which wasn't the intention. In terms of issues, connectivity should be focusing more on rail rather than road, and to make sure that transport corridors are multimodal. So we've got there's lots more to it than that, and that's a very brief summary. But I think there's a lot that's come out of that issues and opportunities engagement that we will then use to help shape the final draft of the long-term strategic transport plan, which just bring me onto the next second part of that report, which is the need to bring to the board a revised programme for producing the strategic transport plan. We were later than expected getting the issues and opportunities paper out, and we had ongoing internal resource issues. So the proposal put to the board, Chair, is that we come back in September with the draft strategic transport plan for the board's approval to then go out to consultation in October and November, and then to come back with the revised strategic transport plan following that consultation, come back to the board in January, February for adoption. That is another delay of between 4 and 5 months, but it just isn't possible to the original idea was to go out to consultation now. That is not going to be possible. I would say we've now got 2 new officers on board, Ola and Hannah, which is going to greatly help our resource issue. So I'm confident that we will be able to go out to consultation in the autumn and have that final version back by early next year for approval. So that's the strategic transport plan report. And then I'll just very briefly do the other 2 reports and then come back to questions if I may. The other 2 reports are an update on where we are on the other aspects of our work programme. And there's a red, amber, green rating for the different work areas. The only work area which isn't green is the strategic transport plan, which I just mentioned, but also the cycling strategy. And we hope to bring back the cycling strategy revised version to the September board. And then the final paper is the forward decision plan, which just lists out the likely decisions to be brought to the board in September, December, and then looking forward into 2024 as well. I will just flag up on the budget side. It's still very early in this financial year, so if you look at the financial table in paper D, it will look as though we haven't spent very much so far. We've only spent about £24,000. We have commitments of about 240,000, but I will say that we're on the point of making further commitments, which will add another roughly about 260,000 to that budget. So whilst it may look as though we're not spending very much at the moment, we've committed and about to be committed. We are well underway with spending this year's budget. Apologies, Chair, that was a very swift run through the last 3 items on the agenda, but happy to take any questions. You're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute. I think it wasn't your fault you had to rush that, James, but it's mine. A very warm welcome to Hannah, by the way, and the sincerest apologies to Ola. Unfortunately, ran out of time. Are there any quick questions, given that we are... Councillor Hadley?
Well, just a suggestion of the decarbonisation work that Ola was going to show. Could we suggest that comes early in the next agenda?
Yes, and my apologies again. But the main thing is that the unitaries, the constituent authorities are using that tool, I think, which is really, really important. It's what we contribute as an STB, is kind of shared resourcing for our constituent authorities, and that's a fine example of it. It's in action already. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and Chair, Ola did have some slides ready, so we can share those with the board as well.
Great, and those are up on the website, are they?
We will put the slides up on the website. Yep.
That's brilliant, and Alice would like to see that as well. There we are. You see, our tools are going nationwide. That's great. And Chris, you've got your
a quick one, Don. Really, as we're moving towards the end of this agenda, and I've got to go and collect my husband from a station, so I should be leaving. Two things. A, I know we promised you this was only for this meeting, but I hope you are going to act as chair for the purposes of getting us through the process of getting an agenda for next time that is workable, manageable, deliverable in the time available. Number one, and I think if there's anything I can do to help you with getting that sorted out, then I'm willing to do so. And secondly, I think that task probably involves meaning that you come to the next meeting with an identified chair, unless you want to carry on doing it.
Yes,
into that, Councillor Alexander. Sorry.
There's a lot in that. I am happy to look at the agenda for the next meeting. It is true. If it wasn't a very manageable agenda this time, it's because I didn't manage it very well. It's as simple as that. We had a lot of good stuff on it, productive discussions, but there's loads more. Yes, I'll take part in the agenda setting for the next time, but no, I won't promise more than that. But thank you for kind words. Councillor Thomas?
Thank you. It was just going back to the strategic transport plan, and there is presumably some benefit in this, the delay, in that we might have DFT guidance on all of our local transport plans, and there is some connection, and maybe we ought to be, whatever that direction is, we should make sure that it is reflected in the strategic transport body's transport plan.
Chair,
suggest.
Yeah, Chair, if I might just come back on that. Yes, that is very well made point. That yes, we've been eagerly anticipating the local transport plan guidance as well as being part of the STB, because the strategic transport plan is part of that sort of what's sometimes referred to as that golden thread coming down from national government to regional strategic transport plan down to the local authorities and their local transport plans. So yes, the LTP guidance is key to producing the strategic transport plan.
Thanks.
What's even more pertinent is that we've got a number of new elected members on this committee, and we're about to go out to consultation on that plan. So we need to be firmly committed to what we're about to go out to consultation on, I think. So let's try and familiarise ourselves with that for some fairly serious decisions coming up. It's a very important document. It goes without saying. Any other business? Do we have any other business, Alan?
None that's been reported to me, Chair.
None that's been reported to us. No. Okay, great, thank you. Can I just close by saying how good the comms of this organisation is. The regular emails, the Twitter account and stuff are all, and the website are all very good, I think. And if we could familiarise ourselves with those, and if we could actually start encouraging others to engage, that's going to be very important. Obviously, when we come to bring our strategic transport plan out, it's really important that we put it in front of as many people as possible, and that we don't become a minority interest. As for a few transport enthusiasts, the general population gets to understand how really important we are as part of that golden thread that James just mentioned. And I think, as there's no other business, I will conclude this meeting, and thank you all, and thank you especially to officers for their work for this meeting. Thank you. Goodbye.
Don, do you want to catch up a minute, or you're busy?
Chair.
Yeah, happy to catch up. Give me 5 minutes, Matt. I've got a few emails I just need to.
Yeah, no, that's all right. It doesn't have to be right
Urgent.
now. Okay. See you later. Bye.
Just 10 minutes. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.